Hello, everybody. Anthony Aniano here from RotoBaller Radio and RotoBaller.com with the Wild Card Weekend sleeper and value plays. Some players to take a look at, whether you're in a fantasy playoff league or looking at some DFS options. 6 games on the slate this weekend. We have the Seahawks and 49ers, Saturday 4:30 Eastern. Saturday night, Chargers Jaguars. 3 games on Sunday, including the Dolphins at the Buffalo Bills, Giants Vikings, Ravens Bengals Sunday night, and then for the first time ever on Wild Card Weekend, a Monday night game, Dallas Cowboys at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So we'll start at the quarterback position here for my sleeper and value play. And the one player I'm excited about this week with that price tag on DraftKings is Daniel Jones of the New York Giants on the road against the Minnesota Vikings. 5,600 on DraftKings. He's averaging 19.1 points per game this year in a DraftKings format. In Week 16, when the Giants played the Minnesota Vikings, Daniel Jones went 30 of 42 for 334 yards and a touchdown, ran 4 times for 34 yards, finished with 24.8 fantasy points. And keep in mind, folks, Minnesota Vikings are 28th in the league in allowing fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. They allow 22.8 points per game with 23 touchdowns through the air allowed this year. On the season, they have allowed 279.8 passing yards per game. So if you're looking for a lower cost quarterback for this week, Daniel Jones on DraftKings, only $5,600. At the running back position, Travis Etienne. Now, he's not really value, right? He's 6,300 on DraftKings. He is lower than some of the other starting running backs in the league for this weekend, but so I wanted to mention him at 6,300. Averaging 13.1 fantasy points per game. Now, Jaguars and Chargers played way back when in Week 3. And if you remember, in Week 3, James Robinson was still involved in that Jacksonville Jaguars offense. But in that Week 3 matchup, Travis Etienne did go 13 of 45 on the ground, had 3 catches on 3 targets for 30 yards, finished with 10.5 fantasy points. Expect, obviously, more usage this week for Etienne on Saturday night against the Chargers defense, a Chargers defense that is 27th in the league against opposing running backs from a fantasy perspective. They allowed 25.8 points per game to opposing running backs all season long, including 19 touchdowns to the running back position. They allow, on average, 145.8 fantasy points per game. So maybe Etienne's not a quote-unquote sleeper for you, but based on this matchup, he needs to be in lineups this week against that Chargers run defense. On the other side, take a look at Eli Mitchell of the 49ers against the Seattle Seahawks. Now, I understand it's Christian McCaffrey's show, and Christian McCaffrey's, I believe, over 10,000 on DraftKings. Well, Eli Mitchell came back from injury last week, only 5 carries, 55 yards, and 2 touchdowns, was effective. And if you remember back when the 49ers first acquired Christian McCaffrey, Eli Mitchell did not go away until he got hurt. While healthy, they utilized him. They played McCaffrey in the slot. McCaffrey was very active in the passing game. Eli Mitchell continued to be involved in running the ball. So he goes 5 for 55, 2 touchdowns in his return last week. And here he is on DraftKings at $4,700, a true value. Averaged 8.7 points per game in the limited playing time he had this year. Remember, 2 stints on IR. But the Seattle defense is terrible against the run. This should be a kind of blow-up matchup for the 49ers, the 2 seed versus the 7 seed. Seattle is 29th in the league against opposing running backs, averaging 27.3 points per game allowed to the running back position, and have allowed 18 touchdowns to running backs this season. On average, they allow 150.2 rushing yards per game. So Etienne and Eli Mitchell a little bit of a risk with Christian McCaffrey, but I do think Mitchell is involved this week against the Seattle Seahawks. At the wide receiver position, I have 3 wide receivers for you. First up, going back to that Giants-Minnesota game, Isaiah Hodgins of the New York Giants against that Vikings secondary. Only $4,100 on DraftKings, yet averaging 10.1 fantasy points per game. In 4 of his last 5 games, Hodgins has averaged 15 or more fantasy points. That's 4 out of his last 5. In Week 16, when the Giants played the Vikings, he was targeted 12 times, had 8 receptions for 89 yards, and a touchdown. 22.9 points in that matchup back on Week 16. Minnesota Vikings are 31st in the league against opposing wide receivers, allowing 39.7 points per game with 13 touchdowns. And keep in mind that number I said earlier, that 279.8 passing yards per game. Hodgins has become a favorite of Daniel Jones. Richie James, a good play as well, as those two wide receivers have stepped up, and this Minnesota secondary is just flat out not good. Second wide receiver to be mindful of, Russell Gage of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers against the Dallas Cowboys. Russell Gage is 3,800 on DraftKings, yet averaging 9.6 points per game. He's got 4 touchdowns in his last 6 games. Okay, he's been a regular part of the red zone offense for this Tampa Bay Buccaneers team. He's got 10 or more fantasy points in 3 of his last 4 games. And the Dallas Cowboys are 26th in the league against opposing wide receivers, allowing 36.3 fantasy points per game to the position, and have allowed 22 touchdowns to wide receivers this season. That is the most wide receiver touchdowns of any of the teams playing this weekend. And my third wide receiver, Josh Palmer of the Los Angeles Chargers. He was a late addition to my list when the news broke that Mike Williams will not only be out this week, but probably miss 2 to 3 weeks due to the injury he suffered last week in that meaningless regular season game. So Josh Palmer in a position to step up like he has done throughout the season when other injuries have affected the Chargers offense. $5,300 on DraftKings for Josh Palmer, 11 points per game on average. In week 3, when the Chargers played the Jacksonville Jaguars earlier in the season, Palmer went 6 catches on 9 targets, 99 yards, 15.9 fantasy points. Now, Jaguars are only 11th in the league against opposing wide receivers. They're actually pretty good, 32.3 points per game. But they have allowed 18 touchdowns to the wide receiver position, the second most touchdowns allowed to the wide receiver position of any team playing, just behind the Dallas Cowboys. And remember, the Jaguars allow just over 250 passing yards per game. And my final player on the list at the tight end position, Dawson Knox of the Buffalo Bills. $4,000 on DraftKings, 9 points per game. In Week 15, when Buffalo played Miami last, he had 6 catches on 8 targets, 98 yards, and a touchdown, 21.8 fantasy points per game. Miami is 29th in the league against opposing tight ends. They've been terrible all year covering the tight end position. 15.2 points per game allowed to tight ends with 10 tight end touchdowns. The most touchdowns to the tight end position of any team playing this weekend. All right, everybody. So the wild card weekend sleeper and value plays: quarterback Daniel Jones, running backs Travis Etienne and Eli Mitchell, 3 wide receivers to be mindful of: Isaiah Hodgins, Russell Gage, Josh Palmer, and Dawson Knox at the tight end position. Don't forget, folks, like and subscribe right here to the RotoBaller YouTube channel for all sorts of great content all throughout the year. Head over to rotoballer.com right now. Check out all the free information, the free news and articles, and then sign up for any premium pass that you choose: baseball, football, basketball, you name it. We've got it for you. Sign up for that premium pass. Use the promo code ACES. Save yourself a little bit of money at checkout. Give me a follow on Twitter at @Aniano Fantasy, and we will see you next time right here on RotoBaller Radio.